gate was already closing when he arrived. He saw it from the road, the black iron panels sliding together with the slow, hydraulic certainty of something that has never been rushed and never needed to be. He was on foot. His truck had broken down 4 kilometers back, which was the kind of irony that only mechanics understood. And he had walked through the Lagos heat carrying his toolbox because a man who does not show up does not eat. And Tobechukwu Adeyemi had 3 children at home and a mother whose medication cost more than a week's work. He reached the gate just before it closed. He pressed his hand against the iron. The security guard looked at him the way guards at gates like this always looked at men like him, with the specific, practiced assessment of someone deciding whether a person's presence constitutes a problem or merely an inconvenience. Tobechukwu wore a work shirt the color of engine oil and carried a toolbox held together with wire he had resoldered himself. His boots had a crack along the left sole that let in water when it rained. He was 43 years old and looked it. He said, "My name is Tobechukwu Adeyemi. I have an appointment with the head housekeeper. Vehicle maintenance, 8 o'clock. The guard looked at his phone, looked back, looked at the toolbox. Then, with the unhurried authority of a man who knows that making someone wait is itself a demonstration of power, he pressed a button and the gate reopened. Tobechukwu walked through. The driveway alone was longer than his entire street. Frangipanis lined both sides, their white flowers so precise and even that they seemed arranged rather than grown. The house at the end of the driveway was the kind of house that made you understand the word compound. Not a house exactly, but a collection of certainties, each one built to remind you that the person who owned it had never in their life needed to wonder whether they could afford something. Glass and stone and the particular shade of cream that expensive buildings go when they have been maintained without interruption. The smell of cut grass and imported flowers reached him before he reached the front steps. He did not go to the front steps. He went around to the side entrance, where deliveries came and where people like him were expected, and he knocked on the door that opened into the kitchen and waited. The housekeeper who opened it was a woman named Mrs. Ease, 50s, efficient, the expression of someone who has managed large households long enough to know exactly what category a person belongs to before they have finished introducing themselves. She said, "You're the mechanic." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "The generator and the 2 vehicles. The Range Rover has a cooling issue and the Prado has been making a sound." She paused. "Do you understand what a cooling issue is?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped aside. The kitchen smelled of pepper soup and something baking. It was large enough that his entire workshop could have fit inside it without touching the walls. 2 younger women moved through it without speaking, their movements practiced and economical, the movements of people who had learned to be efficient in spaces that were not built for them, but in which they spent most of their hours. One of them glanced at him when he entered, and immediately looked away. The other did not look at all. Mrs. Ease led him through the kitchen and out to the compound's motor court, a separate structure behind the main building, where 3 vehicles sat in the shade of a canopy. She gave him the keys. She showed him where the tools were kept, which he did not need since he had his own. She told him lunch was at 1 o'clock if the work was still ongoing, and that he was not to enter the main house for any reason. He said, "Understood." She said, "Madam is in residence today." He looked at her. She said it in a way that meant something. He nodded, as though he understood what it meant even though he didn't, and she walked back inside. He set down his toolbox and opened the bonnet of the Range Rover. If you have ever worked with your hands all your life, and then stood in a place that was built entirely for people who do not, stay with me. He had been working for 40 minutes when he heard it. Not a voice, not a sound in the ordinary sense. What he heard was the particular quality of silence that exists around a child who is present but not making the kind of noise that children make. He had 3 children. He knew the difference between a child who was playing and a child who was simply there, occupying space without filling it. He looked up from under the bonnet. She was standing at the edge of the motor court, perhaps 8 years old, wearing a white dress that had not been playing in. Her hair was in neat braids with gold beads. Her feet were bare on the compound stones. She was watching him with the serious, unblinking attention of a child who has learned to observe the world rather than participate in it, and she was doing something with her left hand, a slow, rhythmic pressing of her fingertips against the side of her jaw. Not fidgeting. Something else. Something habitual. Tobechukwu straightened up slowly. He did not wave. He did not smile in the large performance way that adults sometimes smile at children to signal that they are safe. He simply looked at her the way she was looking at him, with attention. After a moment, he went back to the engine. She did not leave. He heard her footsteps on the stone, light, careful. And when he looked again, she was closer, perhaps 3 meters away, her head tilted slightly to the side, watching his hands in the engine, with the focused interest of someone observing a system they want to understand. He said nothing. He worked. He let her watch. After another 10 minutes, he reached for a wrench, and it wasn't quite in reach, and without thinking he made a small sound. A quiet click of his tongue, the way he always did when something was just out of reach, and looked up to find the wrench. The girl did not react. Not a flinch, not a glance in his direction. She had not heard the sound. Tobechukwu went still. He set down the tool he was holding. He picked up a different one, deliberately letting it knock against the metal of the bonnet. A sharp, ringing sound that would have made any child in the vicinity look up. She did not look up. He looked at her face. She was still watching his hands. Her expression had not changed. She had not heard. He said quietly, "Hello?" Nothing. He said it louder. Nothing. He did not test it further. He had understood. He went back to his work. But something had shifted in the composition of the morning. He moved more carefully now, with the specific awareness of someone who knows they are being watched by someone who is watching differently than he had assumed. She was not watching him for entertainment or out of idle curiosity. She was watching him the way you watch something when sound is not available, as if the visual information has to carry everything, as if eyes must work twice as hard to compensate for what ears cannot provide. He worked. She watched. At 11 o'clock, she sat down on the compound wall and continued watching. She had been there for over an hour. At 11:30, Tobechukwu did something he had not planned to do. He reached into his toolbox, past the wrenches and the wire and the soldering iron, and found what he always kept there, which was a small folded piece of aluminium foil with 3 pieces of groundnut candy wrapped inside. His mother put them there every morning without being asked. She had done it since he was a child, carrying his father's toolbox, and he had never asked her to stop. He walked to the wall. He held out 1 piece of candy. The girl looked at his hand, looked at his face, made no move. He did not push. He simply kept his hand extended and waited with the patience of a man who has learned that patience is not passive. It is the most active thing you can offer another person. After a moment, she took the candy. She did not eat it immediately. She turned it over in her fingers, examining it with the same focused attention she had given everything else. Then she looked at him and did something very specific with her hands. A quick movement, fingers touching her lips, then extending outward. He did not know sign language. He did not know what the gesture meant, but he understood it. "Thank you." He nodded once, walked back to the engine. That was the first morning. He did not know, as he finished the work on the Range Rover and moved to the Prado, that the child he had given groundnut candy to was the reason he had been called here. He did not know that she was the granddaughter of the woman who owned this compound, or that her name was Amara, or that she had been born without hearing in a family that had spent 8 years trying to buy it back for her with the same focused, systematic, completely unsuccessful effort that very wealthy people apply to problems they cannot accept as permanent. He did not know any of this. He just worked. The Prado sound was a bearing. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required more than attention and the right part, which he sourced by phone from a contact in Mushin who could get anything within 2 hours. He had the work finished by 1:15. Mrs. A's brought him a plate of rice and stew at the side entrance, and he ate it standing in the motor court because there was nowhere else indicated for him to sit, and he was not going to ask. He was finishing the rice when the woman appeared. She came from the main house, walking across the compound with the unhurried, assured movement of someone who is accustomed to spaces behaving as they should because she has made them behave that way. She was perhaps 65, her hair entirely natural and silver, her dress the kind of Ankara print that is made for a specific person rather than for anyone. She wore no jewelry except small gold earrings and a watch that Tobechukwu did not know the brand of, but understood instinctively was significant. Her face had the quality of someone who had been through a great number of things and had emerged from all of them still standing, but not without having paid the cost of standing. She was looking at him. Behind her, at a slight distance, Amara walked. She was holding something. He realized it was the piece of aluminium foil from the candy, folded now into a small square. She was holding it with both hands. The woman stopped 5 meters from him. She said, "Mrs. Ease tells me you finished both vehicles." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "She also tells me my granddaughter has been sitting in the motor court since 8:30 this morning." He said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. Not hostile, not suspicious. Something more complicated than that, the look of someone calibrating, measuring, not yet decided. She said, "What did you give her?" He said, "Groundnut candy, ma'am." "I apologize if—" She said, "She ate it." He waited. She said, "Amara does not eat anything from people she does not trust. She has not eaten anything from a stranger since—" She stopped. In a long time, he looked at the child. Amara was looking at her grandmother's face with the careful attention she gave everything. The woman said, "My name is Adeze Okonkwo-Nwosu." She said it the way you say a name when you want it received as information rather than as an introduction to anything further. "What is yours?" He said, "Tobechukwu Adeyemi, ma'am." She looked at him. She said, "How much do I owe you for the work?" He named the figure. It was a fair figure, not inflated for the address. She nodded, and Mrs. Ease would settle it, and that would have been the end of it. He would have packed his toolbox, walked back down the driveway, and this compound would have become one of the many places he had worked and left without consequence. But Amara walked forward. She stopped in front of him and looked up at his face. Then she held up the folded aluminium foil square in both hands, offering it back. Tobechukwu understood immediately that she was not returning it because she didn't want it. She was doing something else. He had 3 children. He understood the language of giving something back in order to give something forward. He shook his head gently. "No, keep it." She looked at him. Then she reached into the pocket of her white dress and produced something. A small drawing, done in pencil on a torn piece of exercise book paper. He took it. It was a car. It was his truck, or what she had imagined his truck looked like since she had not seen it, but there was a figure beside it, clearly him, clearly his toolbox, and the figure was smiling. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at Amara. Something moved in his chest, not sentiment, not pity, but recognition. The specific recognition of someone who sees in another person something they understand from the inside. Behind Amara, Mama Adaizi was watching him with the expression of someone who has been watching their granddaughter's face for 8 years and has learned to read every signal. She was watching what Tobechukwu's face did when he looked at Amara's drawing. He carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his shirt pocket. He said to Amara slowly, facing her directly so she could see his mouth clearly, "I will keep this." She looked at his lips. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but the signal that precedes a smile in a child who has learned not to give them too quickly. Mama Adeyemi said nothing, but she did not walk away. He came back the following Thursday, not because there was more vehicle work. He came because he had spent 5 days thinking about the drawing in his shirt pocket and about the child who gave it to him, and about the way she pressed her jaw with her fingertips. He was not a doctor. He had no qualifications in anything except engines and the specific mechanical knowledge that comes from 20 years of taking things apart and putting them back together. But he had also grown up in a compound in Mushin with a cousin named Damilola, who had been deaf since birth, and Damilola had shown him things that doctors had not. Specifically, that deafness was not always one thing, that the word covered a range of conditions, some of which were permanent and some of which were not, and that the difference between the two was sometimes a matter of what someone was willing to look at carefully enough. He had also spent 5 evenings reading on his phone, which was something he rarely did, but when he had a question, he pursued it with the same methodical attention he gave to engine problems. He arrived at the gate. He told the guard he had a small follow-up matter for Mrs. E's. The guard called inside. He waited. The gate opened. Mrs. Ez met him at the side entrance with the expression of someone who had been given instructions she found slightly unusual. She said, "Madam asked that you come to the main sitting room." He followed her through the kitchen, through a corridor, into a room that smelled of polished wood and a flower he could not name. Expensive. Specific. The smell of a room that is never left uncared for. The furniture was dark wood and cream fabric. Gold-framed family photographs on the walls. A window that looked onto a garden where everything was still and perfect. Mama Adeyemi was seated. Across from her was a man, perhaps 40, wearing a suit that fit him the way suits fit people who have been wearing them since their 20s, the suit as armor, the suit as declaration. He had her eyes, but not her composure. His composure was a performance where hers was a condition. He looked at Tobechukwu when he entered the room with the specific, rapid assessment of someone who has already categorized him and finds no need to revise. Mama Adeyemi said, "Tobechukwu, sit, please." He sat. The suited man said, "Mother, I don't understand why." She said, "Chidi, please." He stopped. Stopped in the specific way of a man who has learned that when this woman says please in that register, the word means something completely different from what it means in his own mouth. Mama Adeyemi looked at Tobechukwu. She said, "You came back." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Why?" He considered the question the way he considered all precise questions. Carefully, without rushing to fill the silence with something easier than the truth. He said, "Because of the way your granddaughter was pressing her jaw." The room went quiet. Chidi said, "I'm sorry." Tobechukwu said, "When I was here last week, she kept pressing her fingertips against the left side of her jaw, just below the ear. I've seen that before." He paused. "I'm not a doctor, ma'am. I want to be clear about that. But I have a cousin who was deaf until he was 12, and what caused his deafness was something specific. I thought," he stopped. "I thought it was worth mentioning." Mama Adeyemi was very still. Chidi said, "We have seen every specialist in this country, and in 3 others. ENT surgeons, audiologists, neurologists. The best diagnosticians in London, in Houston, in Johannesburg. Every single one." Tobechukwu said, "Has anyone looked at her ear?" Chidi stared at him. He said, "That is the most—" Mama Adeyemi said, "What do you mean?" Tobechukwu said, "I mean physically looked. Not a scan, not a test. Just looked at the canal directly, with a light. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. Chidi's voice was controlled when he spoke, but controlled in the way that contains rather than eliminates something. He said, "Are you suggesting that 8 years of medical evaluation somehow missed something that He did not finish the sentence. The word at the end of it did not come out, but it had been on its way, and everyone in the room knew what it was. Tobechukwu did not react. He waited. Mama Adeyemi was looking at him with those calm, measuring eyes. She said, "My son Chidi is Amara's father. Her mother." She paused in the way that people pause around a name that is no longer accessible. Amara's mother passed 3 years ago. Chidi has been raising her alone. She said it without apology and without editorial, simply placing the information in the room so that it was present. Tobechukwu said, "I'm sorry for that, sir." Chidi looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. He said nothing. Mama Adeyemi said, "What do you know about your cousin's case?" Tobechukwu said, "He was deaf from birth. Everyone assumed it was permanent. When he was 12, a doctor at the General Hospital in Ibadan, not a specialist, just a regular doctor, looked in his ear with a light and found an impacted mass. Something that had been there since birth, growing slowly, completely blocking the canal. They removed it in an outpatient procedure. He has been hearing normally ever since. The room absorbed this. Chidi said, "That kind of obstruction would have shown on imaging." Tobechukwu said, "My cousins did not. The doctor told us it was a dense keratin formation. I learned the word later. It does not always appear clearly on standard imaging. It looks like normal tissue until someone looks directly." He said it without aggression, without the need to be right. Just, "Here is what I know, and I am telling you because it seems important." Chidi's jaw was tight. He said, "You are a mechanic." Tobechukwu said, "Yes, sir." Chidi said, "You want us to take the medical advice of a mechanic over the assessments of—" Mama Adeyemi said, "Chidi." The word was quiet. It ended the sentence. She looked at Tobechukwu for a long moment. She said, "Is there anything else?" He said, "When I gave her the candy, she reached for it with her left hand first, and then switched to her right. She favors the right side when she eats, but she presses the left side." He paused. "I may be completely wrong. I know I am not a doctor, but I thought it was worth saying." Mama Adeyemi stood. Chidi stood with her, automatically, the habit of a son who has learned to move when his mother moves. She said, "Mrs. Ease will settle your account." She walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped without turning. She said, "What you said about looking directly. Which hospital was it?" "In Ibadan." He told her. She nodded once, walked out. Chidi remained in the room for a moment longer. He looked at Tobechukwu with an expression that was not quite what it had been. Less assured, less sealed. He said quietly, "If you are wasting our time." Tobechukwu said, "I hope I am." Chidi left. Tobechukwu sat alone in the room that smelled of expensive flowers. He looked at the family photographs on the wall. Mama Adeyemi in a boardroom, younger, her hair still half dark. Chidi at what looked like a graduation, grinning the way young men grin when they believe the future is purely a matter of arrival. A photograph of a woman, late 30s, a face that carried something, a quality he could not name in a photograph, holding a newborn. The newborn's eyes were closed. The woman's were open and looking directly at the camera with the specific expression of someone who is both exhausted and more awake than they have ever been. He looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he picked up his toolbox and walked back through the corridor to the kitchen and out through the side door into the compound, where Amara was sitting on the motor court wall. She watched him walk toward the gate. He stopped. He turned. He reached into his shirt pocket. The drawing was still there. He held it up so she could see it. Held it up so she understood he had kept it. She looked at it, looked at his face. Then she pressed both palms together. He did not know what the sign meant, but he understood it anyway, in the same way you understand things that are communicated in a language that predates language. He walked out through the gate. 2 weeks passed. He did not hear from them. He went back to his workshop in Mushin, to the line of cars that waited every day for attention, to the noise and heat and the radio and the smell of petrol and his children coming in after school and his mother's groundnut candy every morning and the life he had built from everything available to him. He thought about Amara when he was working on something that required patience, the jobs that could not be forced, that required you to wait for the engine to tell you what was wrong before you could address it. He thought about the drawing. Then the call came. It came on a Wednesday afternoon, while he had his arms inside the transmission of a Corolla. His phone was on the workbench, and he almost did not answer it because the number was unfamiliar. And unfamiliar numbers during working hours were usually people wanting prices he could not lower. He answered. The voice was Mrs. Ease's, formal, efficient, giving nothing away in its tone. She said, "Madam requests your presence at the compound on Friday morning at 9 o'clock. She said to bring nothing. Just come," he said. "Is everything—" Mrs. Ease said, "Madam will explain on Friday." She rang off. He stood with the phone in his transmission-stained hand and looked out the workshop door at the Mushin street, the hawkers and the motorcycles and the afternoon light coming through the dust at the angle it came at this hour, golden and particular, the light that always made him think of things almost within reach. He did not know what had happened. He did not know whether they had taken Amara to a doctor. He did not know whether what he had said had been heard or dismissed or simply absorbed into the enormous pile of information that wealthy people collect and organize and file and never act on. He did not know whether the girl was any different than she had been 2 weeks ago. But something had shifted. He felt it the way he felt an engine that had been running wrong for so long that you forgot what right sounded like. And then one day something changes, a small thing, a bearing, a seal, and the sound comes back. Not loud, just right. He went back to the Corolla. Friday was 3 days away. He would know on Friday. But something was already different. He could not have explained it. He just knew. The way a mechanic knows, the way a father knows, the way a man knows when the thing he has been quietly, carefully, persistently attending to has finally moved. He went back to work. Outside, the Mushin afternoon continued its enormous business. A child on the street was calling to another child. The sound carried through the workshop door, clear and carrying, the kind of sound that anyone within range received without effort or thought, received it and processed it, and moved on without once considering what it would mean to live in a world from which that sound, and every sound, had been taken. He thought about Amara. He thought about the drawing in his shirt pocket. He thought about a woman who had spent 8 years buying back something that could not be bought. And he went back to work. Friday came the way important days always come, looking exactly like every other day until you are inside it. Tobechukwu arrived at the gate at 8:55. The same guard, the same iron panels, the same driveway lined with frangipanis that smelled of something too deliberate to be natural. But this time, the guard opened the gate without consulting his phone and said simply, "Madam is expecting you. Go to the main entrance." The main entrance. Not the side door, not the kitchen. The main entrance, with its wide stone steps and the double doors of dark carved wood and the brass handles that caught the morning light. He stood at the bottom of those steps for a moment. He was wearing his cleanest work shirt. It was still a work shirt. His boots still had the crack in the left sole. His hands, despite washing 3 times that morning, still carried the shadow of engine oil in the creases of his knuckles. The kind of stain that is not dirt, but identity. The record of a life spent doing a specific thing with your hands and not apologizing for it. He went up the steps. Mrs. Ease opened the door before he knocked. She looked at him differently than she had the first time. Not warmer, exactly. She was not a woman whose face did warmth easily, but with a recalibrated attention, the look of someone who has revised a category and is still adjusting to the revision. She said, "Come in." He stepped inside. The entrance hall was the kind of space designed to make an immediate statement about the person who owned it. Marble floors that reflected everything above them. A staircase that curved upward with the easy confidence of beautiful things. Light coming through high windows and falling in the specific way that architects plan for and regular houses never quite achieve. It smelled of polished wood and cut flowers and the particular quality of air that moves through large, well-maintained spaces where money has never had to worry. His worn boots reflected back at him from the floor. He kept walking. Mrs. Ease led him not to the sitting room where he had spoken with Mama Adeyemi and Chidi, but to a different room, a smaller one at the back of the house, a room that felt used rather than displayed. Bookshelves with actual books on them, spines cracked and pages marked. A writing desk with papers on it, 2 sofas facing each other across a low table, a window looking onto a garden, where a bougainvillea climbed a white wall in the lavish, uncurated way that plants grow when they are left to do what they want. Mama Adeyemi was standing at the window. She turned when he entered. Her face told him something had happened. Not the fact of it. He could see the fact of it immediately, but the weight of it. The specific expression of someone who has received news they have been waiting 8 years to receive and is still in the early stage of understanding what it means to have received it. She said, "Sit down, Tobechukwu." He sat. She sat across from him. She placed her hands on her knees and looked at him with the full, undivided attention of a woman who does not do anything by partial measure. She said, "We took Amara to Ibadan." He waited. She said, "To the general hospital, not a specialist, not a private clinic. A doctor there, a young woman, recently qualified, used an otoscope. A simple instrument, standard equipment in every hospital in the world." She paused. She found it within 3 minutes. The room was very quiet. Tobechukwu said nothing. Mama Adeyemi said, "A dense impaction. Both ears, but more severe on the left." She said the term. He heard the words, but what he heard underneath them was the specific, enormous fact that those words contained. She said, "The young doctor told us it is the kind of formation that does not always appear on imaging. That standard audiological assessments test the nerve response, but do not always identify mechanical obstruction. That it can be present from birth and grow slowly enough that each successive scan simply records what the previous one recorded." She stopped. She said that in her estimation, it had been there since Amara was born. Tobechukwu kept his face still. He said, "Is she?" Mama Adeyemi said, "The procedure was yesterday." She said it simply, the way she said everything, the simplicity, not a performance of calm, but the actual condition of a woman who has processed a great deal and learned that the weight of things is not reduced by dramatizing them. She stood. She walked to the door that connected to the adjacent room and opened it. Amara was standing in the doorway. She was wearing the same gold-beaded braids, the same bare feet on the marble, but she was standing differently than she had stood in the motor court. There was something altered in her posture. A slight elevation, the way a person stands when the world has recently added a dimension it did not previously have. Her eyes found him immediately, and then, slowly, experimentally, like someone operating a new instrument they are not yet fully certain of, she turned her head toward the open window. Outside, a bird was calling from the bougainvillea. She heard it. He could see the moment she heard it. The tiny shift in her expression, the almost imperceptible parting of her lips, the slight pause in her breathing that meant something had arrived that had never arrived before. She turned back to Tobechukwu. Her face was doing several things at once in the way that children's faces do when emotion has not yet learned to be orderly. He stood up. He walked toward her and stopped at a distance that was respectful, not presumptuous, the distance of someone who understands that wonder is fragile and should not be crowded. He said her name, quietly, Amara. She heard it. He watched her hear it, watched the word land, her own name, arriving through sound for the first time in 8 years of life, arriving not as a vibration felt through floors or a shape read from a mouth, but as an actual sound, his actual voice, her actual name. Her eyes filled. She walked forward and wrapped both arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest and held on with the specific, total grip of a child who has found something solid and is not yet ready to let it verify it is real. Tobechukwu stood very still. His hands came up slowly, and he placed them on her shoulders, gently, the way you hold something that has been waiting a long time to be held. And he looked over her head at Mama Adeyemi, who was standing in the doorway with her arms folded and her eyes doing something that her face was working very hard not to do and not entirely succeeding. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that the room was not already saying. Then a sound from the corridor. Footsteps, fast, the footsteps of someone who has been trying to arrive somewhere and has not been moving slowly. Chidi appeared in the doorway behind his mother. He was in a suit again, but it was sitting on him differently today. Looser somehow, as if the person inside it had changed dimensions since he put it on. His eyes went immediately to his daughter. Amara heard him coming. She turned toward the sound before he appeared, turned toward the footsteps, recognizing them or simply responding to the fact that footsteps were now something she could receive. And when Chidi came through the door, she looked at his face. And then she said something. The word was imperfect, unpracticed. The word of someone whose mouth knows the shape of a sound it has never actually made. But it was clear. One syllable, rough-edged and real. Dad. Chidi stopped moving. The word hit him the way certain things hit people who have been braced against them for so long that when they finally arrive, the bracing is no defense at all. His face did something it had clearly not done in a long time. His composure, that well-tailored, expensively maintained composure, simply fell away like a garment he'd been holding up by effort. And what was underneath it was a father who had been standing in silence with his daughter for 8 years and had just heard her voice for the first time. He crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to his knees in front of her and took her face in both hands and looked at her with the specific expression of a person encountering a miracle they had stopped believing was coming, and Amara looked back at him and said it again, Dad. And this time it was less rough, already slightly more certain, the muscle memory of language beginning to form in real time. Tobechukwu stepped back. He moved to the edge of the room, not retreating, not making himself invisible, but making space in the specific way that people who understand the difference between their role and someone else's make space. He was not the center of this. He had never been the center of it. He had been the thing that pointed toward the center, and the pointing was done. He looked at the family portrait on the wall of this room, smaller than the one in the sitting room, less formal. Amara at perhaps 3 years old, before he had known her, sitting on a woman's lap. The woman had Chidi's jawline and Mama Adeyemi's eyes, and the expression of someone who was entirely present in the moment the photograph was taken. Amara's mother. He looked at her for a moment, then looked away. Mama Adeyemi came to stand beside him. She was quiet for a moment, watching her son and granddaughter. Then she said, without looking at him, "How did you know?" He said, "I wasn't certain." She said, "But something told you." He said, "My cousin," and the way she pressed her jaw, and the way she favored one side. He paused. "I've been working with machines for 20 years. When something is blocked, There is always a sign. You just have to know what you're looking at. She was quiet. He said, any doctor would have seen it if they had looked directly. She said, yes. She said it with a specific weight, the weight of a person sitting with the gap between what should have happened and what did. She said, 8 years and 11 specialists, and no one looked directly. He did not answer. What? She said, they looked at scans and tests and numbers and reports. She paused. No one put a simple instrument in my granddaughter's ear and looked with their own eyes. She said this without theatrical anger, with the quiet, heavy anger of someone who has understood something that cannot be undone, only accepted. She turned and looked at him. She said, I owe you something. He said, no, ma'am. She said, don't do that. She said it firmly, not unkindly. Don't diminish what you did. That is something men like you are taught to do, and it is wrong. She held his gaze. You came back when you had no obligation to come back. You said something you knew might be dismissed. You said it anyway. She paused. That is not a small thing. He said nothing. She said, I want to ask you something. He waited. She said, your workshop in Mushin. He said, yes, ma'am. She said, what do you need? He looked at her. He said, Mom? She said, not as a transaction, not as payment. She was looking at him with that direct, unhurried attention. I want to understand what you are working with and what you are working toward. He was quiet for a moment. He had been asked this question before, by a bank loan officer who had ultimately said no, by a government small business program that had approved him for an amount that covered one piece of equipment, but not the second piece that would have made the first one useful. He had learned to answer the question with the amount of honesty that institutions could absorb, which was less than the full amount. But this was not an institution. He said, I have 1 lift and 2 compression tools. I have a hydraulic press I bought in parts and reassembled. My workshop is rented. The landlord has been patient, but the rent is behind. He stopped. What I need is a second lift, an alignment machine, and a computer diagnostic system. With those 3 things I can take any job that comes in, not only the jobs that can be done by hand. He paused. And I need to own the space. I have been renting for 12 years. I cannot build on rented ground. He said it plainly, as a mechanic explains an engine problem. Here is the fault. Here is what is needed. Here is what it would do. Mama Adeyemi listened to all of it. She said, how many people work with you? He said, 2, both trained by me. He paused. I trained 4 others over the years who now have their own workshops. She looked at him. She said, you trained them. He said, yes, ma'am. She said, where did you learn? He said, my father. And everything else by taking things apart and putting them back together until I understood them. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Chidi runs the operations division of Okonkwo Nwosu Holdings. The company has a fleet of 43 vehicles. We have a contract with a maintenance provider in Victoria Island who is, she paused, selecting the word, adequate. She looked at him. Adequate is not what this family deserves. He waited. She said, I am not offering you charity. I do not believe in it. She said it with the certainty of someone who has a clear and reasoned philosophy on the subject. I am offering you a contract. 43 vehicles, scheduled maintenance, emergency response, full accountability. In exchange, the contract will be a formal commercial agreement at market rates. She paused. The rates this company pays are above market. We expect above market quality. She looked at him steadily. Can you deliver that? He said, yes. She said, your workshop. Where is the land? He said, the building sits on a plot that has been in my landlord's family for 30 years. He has mentioned selling. I do not have what he is asking. She said, "What is he asking?" He told her. She nodded once, the nod of someone for whom the figure is not a conversation stopper. She said, "I will have my lawyer call yours on Monday." He said, "I don't have a lawyer, ma'am." She said, "You will, by Monday." She turned back toward the room where Chidi and Amara were sitting now on the sofa together, Amara with her head against her father's arm, both of them listening to something outside the window, with the shared, quiet attention of two people experiencing the same thing differently, but together. She said, without turning, "What your cousin's doctor told you about the formation. Did you understand it when they explained it?" He said, "Enough to explain it to someone else." She said, "You retained the medical information and applied it correctly 12 years later." He said, "I remembered it because it mattered." She turned and looked at him. She said, "That is the correct answer." She held his gaze for a moment. "You are a man who pays attention to things that matter. That is not common. It is more valuable than most things people spend money acquiring." He did not know how to receive a statement like that from a woman like this. He received it the only way he knew, without deflecting it and without inflating it, just letting it stand. From across the room, Amara looked up. She had been listening. He realized she had been listening to their voices, not understanding all of it. Her comprehension of spoken language would need time and practice, and the specific work of a mind learning to process something it had previously been denied. But listening to the fact of sound, to the quality of voices in a room, to the specific texture of a world that had existed all along, but had only just arrived. She signed something to him. He did not know the sign. He looked at Mama Adeyemi. She said, "She is asking if you are staying for lunch." He looked at Amara. He looked at Mama Adeyemi. He thought about his workshop, his 2 employees, the Corolla he had left mid-transmission on Thursday, the phone calls he had not returned, the mother who would have his lunch on the table at home at 1 o'clock whether he was there or not. He said, "I don't want to impose." Mama Adeyemi said, "You restored my granddaughter's hearing. You will impose as long as necessary." She walked toward the dining room door, and the sentence was closed, the way she closed sentences, fully, without residual opening. Tobechukwu looked at Amara. She was looking at him with those serious, watchful eyes, and she was doing something he had not seen her do before. She was humming. Very quietly, barely audible, the tuneless, exploratory sound of a person discovering that sound can come from inside as well as outside, that her own body was capable of making it, that she herself was not silent. He listened to it. He thought about his cousin, Damilola, who had done the same thing for weeks after the procedure. Walking through the house making sounds, not words, just sounds, cataloguing the fact of his own voice the way you catalogue a new room you have been given access to and are still understanding the dimensions of. He thought about Amara's mother in the photograph, who had looked directly at the camera. He thought about what it would have meant to her to know this day had come. He went to lunch. The dining table seated 12, and there were 4 of them. But Mama Adeyemi did not adjust for the table's size. She sat at her end, and Chidi sat to her right, and Tobechukwu sat across from Chidi, and Amara sat beside Tobechukwu, and the table's scale, rather than making them seem fewer, made the meal feel significant, as if the space itself was marking an occasion. The food was jollof rice with fried plantain, and a pepper soup that arrived in a separate bowl, and smelled of things that home smelled of, regardless of what the home itself looked like. Amara ate. She ate with the focused, uncomplicated appetite of a child who is happy, and every few bites she stopped and turned her head toward a sound, the clatter of a fork, the door to the kitchen, a truck on the road outside the compound wall. And each time she turned toward a sound, she registered it and returned to her food with a slightly more satisfied expression, as if each new sound confirmed what the previous one had told her. The world is loud, and I am in it. Chidi said little at first. He was a man recalibrating, and recalibration is not a quick process when the thing being recalibrated is the central assumption of 8 years. He watched his daughter. He ate. He looked once at Tobechukwu across the table with an expression that was not the expression he had worn in the sitting room 3 weeks ago. Not the armored, categorical expression of a man whose certainties are intact. Something had been opened, and he was still working out how to be a person with an opening in him. He said, "The doctor in Ibadan, Dr. Fatima Aliyu." She was not much older than my junior staff. Tobechukwu said, "Yes, sir." Chidi said, "She asked me at the end of the procedure, after it was done, after Amara had heard her first sounds, and we were both." He stopped. "She asked me how it had come to her attention after all this time. I told her about you." She nodded and said, "Sometimes the problem is not a lack of medicine, it is a lack of attention." He let that sit in the room. Tobechukwu said nothing. Chidi said, "I was not kind to you when you came here." He said it without preamble or justification, the way certain men say things when they have decided that the truth is owed directly. "I heard what you were saying and I—" He stopped. I could not allow it to be true, because if a mechanic could see what 11 specialists had missed, then I had to ask what I had missed, what I had failed to notice in my own child. He looked at Tobechukwu with that opened expression. "That was not your fault, and I handled it badly." Tobechukwu said, "You were protecting her." Chidi said, "I was protecting myself." The table was quiet. Mama Adizi refilled her water glass and said nothing, which was its own form of commentary. Amara looked from her father's face to Tobechukwu's face and back, reading the quality of the exchange with the attention of a child who has spent 8 years learning to extract everything available from what she could see. She tapped Tobechukwu's arm. He looked at her. She signed slowly, with the deliberate care of someone choosing the most important thing to say. She pressed 2 fingers to her ear. Then she pointed at him. Then she pressed both palms together, the sign he had seen her make before, in the motor court, the sign he had not known then and knew now. Safe. Thank you. And something else. Something in the sequence of the 3 that was greater than each of them separately. He pressed both palms together in return. She smiled. Not the flicker that preceded a smile. The full thing. Unguarded, complete, the smile of a child who has decided to give it without reservation. He kept it. He would keep it the way he had kept the drawing, not as a keepsake, but as a fact, a piece of evidence about what people were capable of when they stopped standing in each other's way. 2 years passed. Adeyemi Precision Workshop moved from its rented Mushin plot to a property on Agege Motor Road. A building with 4 bays, a reception office, a parts storage room, and an alignment machine that was the best available, and that Tobechukwu had selected personally after 3 weeks of research. The hydraulic lifts were German. The diagnostic system was the same model used by the official dealerships. The sign above the entrance was hand-painted by a man on his street who charged 2,000 naira and did it in 3 hours, and did it well. He employed 7 people, all of them trained by him. The Okonkwo Nwosu fleet contract was the anchor that had made the new workshop possible. Not the only client, but the one that had provided the certainty that allowed the bank to provide the rest. 43 vehicles maintained with the methodical, personal attention that Tobechukwu applied to every engine that came into his care. Not because someone was watching, but because that was what the work required, and he had never been the kind of man who did work differently when someone was watching than when they weren't. Mrs. Ease called him directly when something went wrong with a vehicle. She called him the way you call someone reliable, without explaining the request, without accounting for their time, simply calling because she knew the call would be answered, and the problem would be solved. Mama Adeyemi called him once, on a Tuesday evening, about something that was not a vehicle. She called to tell him that the Okonkwo Nwosu Foundation was establishing a vocational training program and that she wanted his input on the automotive curriculum. He said he would send his thoughts in writing. She said she would prefer to discuss them in person. He said Friday morning. She said Thursday. He said Thursday. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Chidi came to the workshop once, unannounced, on a Saturday morning when the bays were full, and Tobechukwu was doing a job himself rather than delegating it, because there are certain engines that require the person who understands them best, and delegation is not always the most efficient use of anyone. Chidi stood and watched him work for a while without speaking. Then he said, "I would like to bring Amara sometime. She wants to see what you do." Tobechukwu said, "Bring her on a Saturday. The bays are open, and there is more to see." Chidi nodded. He said, "She speaks now. You know that. She said it as an update, as a thing being reported to someone who had a right to the report." Tobechukwu said, "Mrs. Easy mentioned it." Chidi said, "She has been in speech therapy for 18 months. She is—" He stopped. "She talks constantly." He said this with the expression of a father who has been given an abundance that is also occasionally overwhelming, and who would not trade it for anything. She has opinions about everything. She argued with her teacher last week about whether a book ending was satisfying. Tobechukwu said, "What was the book?" Chidi said, "Something about a girl who finds a hidden garden." Tobechukwu said, "What did Amara say about the ending?" Chidi almost smiled. She said it was too easy, that the character got what she wanted without losing anything first. Tobechukwu said, "She's right." Chidi looked at him. He said, "Yes." He said it the way he had said other things in the past 2 years, with the directness of a man who has learned that directness is more efficient and more honest than the performance of certainty. I think she's right, too. He shook hands with Tobechukwu before he left. A real handshake, with the grip and duration of something that means what it looks like it means. Tobechukwu went back to the engine. The following Saturday, Amara came to the workshop with her father. She wore jeans and a yellow shirt, and her hair was natural and loose, and she walked in through the bay doors with the alert, comprehensive attention that had not changed since the motor court. The same quality of observation, the same focused interest in systems and how they worked, except now it was accompanied by questions. Constant, precise, well-formed questions. The questions of a mind that had always been working at full capacity and had simply, finally, been given all its instruments. She wanted to know what every tool was called. She wanted to know why the compression test mattered. She wanted to know what the diagnostic machine was reading and what each number meant, and what happened if the number was wrong. Tobechukwu answered every question. He answered them with the full detail that the question deserved, not the simplified version that adults sometimes give children to end the conversation. He answered them as a mechanic answers another mechanic, with the assumption that the person asking can understand the answer if it is given correctly. She understood every answer. At noon, Tobechukwu took 3 pieces of groundnut candy from his shirt pocket. His mother had put them there that morning, as she always did. He held out one to Amara. She took it without hesitation. She looked at him. She said, "You always have these." He said, "My mother puts them there every morning." She said, "Why?" He said, "She started when I was 7 carrying my father's toolbox." She said, "A man who works with his hands deserves something sweet in his pocket." Amara turned this over. Then she said, "I like your mother." He said, "She would like you." Amara ate the candy. She looked around the workshop, at the cars in the bays, at the men working, at the light coming through the high windows and falling across the floor in the particular way that workshop light falls, warm and functional, the light of a place where things are made right. She said, without looking at him, "I heard you, you know." That first day, in the motor court. He looked at her. She said, "When you knocked the wrench against the bonnet, I didn't hear it, but I heard your footsteps when you walked to the wall. And I heard—" She paused, selecting the word with the care of someone who takes language seriously. "I heard that you weren't afraid of me." He said nothing. She looked at him. She said, "Everyone else was a little afraid of me, or sad for me. You just worked." He said, "You were watching my hands. I was watching yours." He paused. "You had good attention." She looked at him with those eyes, Mama Adezi's eyes in a younger face, the eyes of a person for whom observation is not passive, but active, not a way of waiting, but a way of understanding. She said, "I want to learn engines." He said, "Then come back next Saturday." She nodded once with the settled certainty of someone who has made a decision. They stood in the bay in the Saturday workshop light, the child who had spent 8 years in a world without sound, and the mechanic who had paid attention when no one asked him to. And around them the workshop did what workshops do. It made the noise of things being made right, the sound of work done carefully, the ordinary, extraordinary sound of people who know what they are doing and are doing it. Outside, Lagos continued. The generators and the traffic and the market voices and the motorcycles and the children and the birds and the 1,000 overlapping simultaneous sounds of a city that never stops. All of it available, all of it present, all of it arriving. Amara stood with her face turned slightly toward the bay doors, listening. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been the person who saw what everyone else had stopped looking for, subscribe to Tales of Tears African and ring the bell. Leave a comment telling us the moment in this story that moved you most. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the most powerful thing in the world is not money, not credentials, not connections. It is a person who pays attention when no one has asked them to. We are here every week. The next story begins where this one ends, with someone who is carrying something alone and someone who is finally ready to help them carry it.